Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm doing another 5 paint challenge, painting this Space Marine as a white scar using just white scar, Mephiston Red, Abaddon Black, Leadbelcher and Celestra Grey. As you can see, I've already primed the model white, as this will give us a nice base coat to begin with for the rest of the colours on our model. First thing I'm doing is I'm going to come in with Celestra Grey. I'm going to paint all of the power armour. Let's take some of the paint, pop it on your palette, and then with a little bit of water, thin it down just so it runs nice and smoothly off of your brush. And now I'm going to paint all of the power armour with a couple of coats of Celestra Grey. Now this isn't going to give great coverage on the first layer, but by keeping the paint nice and thin, building up several layers, we will build up to a nice solid colour of Celestra Grey all over the power armour. Now I know white scars traditionally have pure white power armour, but the problem with white is it's really hard to highlight it. So by coming in with the Celestra Grey, it will allow us to highlight the model up to white, while those highlights will be nice and visible. This is a very light grey, which once we apply other colours, will read as a white colour all over the model. So just take your time at this step, work your way around the model, and in nice thin layers, build up that Celestra Grey so we've got a nice solid colour of light Celestra Grey all over the model. So as you can see, after the first coat, it's very patchy coverage all over the power armour. So I'm coming back in with a second coat to build up to a nice solid colour of Celestra Grey all over the power armour of the Space Marine. Now this may take 2 or 3 coats. Just keep going until you get a solid cover of Celestra Grey all over the power armour to the Space Marine. You don't need to worry about being too neat at this stage, because we will be painting over other areas with darker colours later on. Just make sure you do work this into all of the recesses to hide all of that white scar that's on the power armour. And after a couple of coats of Celestra Grey, you can see I've built up to a solid base colour all over the power armour of the Space Marine. So now with some Abaddon Black, I'm going to come in and I'm going to paint all of the weapons, the pouches and the undersuit to the Space Marine. So the first thing I'm doing is coming in over the gun. I'm going to lay a couple of layers of thinned down Abaddon Black all over the gun casing and the metallic parts till we get a nice smooth base colour. I find that by putting Abaddon Black over areas we're going to paint with Leadbelcher later, this gives a much better base for the Leadbelcher to work off of. I find it gives much better coverage and a smoother result over black rather than white. So on the chainsword here, I'm also coming in and giving all of the chainsword and the chain and the engine a base coat of Abaddon Black. Be nice and neat when you're around the power armour. We don't want to get any of this black over the Celestra Grey we've already painted. So I'm also going to paint these vents here on the backpack, giving them a coat of Abaddon Black, because we'll be coming back in later and painting over these with Leadbelcher. And also the pouches and the belt, I'm going to catch these with a couple of layers of Abaddon Black as well. Your first layer may be slightly patchy, but with the second layer you should get a solid black colour all over these areas on the Space Marine. At this stage here, I'm also picking out these strapping parts here on his back. as well as his belt. And finally, all of these ridged parts here to his undersuit, I'm going to catch these with a couple of coats of Abaddon Black as well. Being very careful here where I'm around the power armour, making sure I don't get any of this over the Celestra Grey we've already painted. If you need to, use a small brush so you can keep control of the paint and don't overload the paint. Just do a couple of thin layers of Abaddon Black to get a solid base colour all over that undersuit. And after a couple of coats of Abaddon Black, we've base coated all of the areas that will be black, and we're going to paint with metallics. So now with some Mephiston Red, I'm going to paint the shoulder trim, being nice and neat once again while I'm around the white, making sure I don't get this over any of the Celestra Grey. And I'm also going to paint the Aquila on his chest as well. So make sure you work this into the recesses of all the feathers and the skull to build up to a solid coat of Mephiston Red all over that Aquila. Finally, I'm going to pick out the eye lenses at this stage as well, just sinking a little bit of Mephiston Red into those eye lenses. And with that Mephiston Red applied, it's broken up the white to the power armour and picked out those details on the Space Marine. So now with some Leadbelcher, I'm going to apply the final base coat to the model. So for this, I'm going to pick out all of the metallic details. So it's things like the muzzle to the gun, as well as the handle and the magazine. The engine and the teeth to the chainsword. And the vents on the backpack as well. You can make sure you catch these with a couple of coats of Leadbelcher. And with that Leadbelcher applied, that's all of the base coats applied to the model. So the next step is we're going to do some shading. So first of all, I'm coming in with some Celestra Grey and Abaddon Black. This is about a 90-10 mix of Celestra Grey to Abaddon Black. Just want to darken down that Celestra Grey just a little bit. So I'm going to mix the two colours together. Add a lot of water to this mix because we want to thin this down so it runs really smoothly off of the brush and will find its way into all of the recesses to the model. So keep adding lots of water till it runs really smoothly like a shade paint. And then with a really fine brush, I'm going to sink this into all of the recesses of the power armour. Now this isn't too dark when it's wet, it does dry a little bit darker, really adds that definition into all of these recesses. So this step will take a while as you work your way around the entire model, at the edge of every panel, every recess on that power armour. Apply a thin line of this shade into all of those recesses. If at any point you do come in a little bit too thick, you can come in with some pure Celestra Grey once it's dried and paint back over it to thin the lines down. But just take your time, work your way around the model and apply some of this mix into every single recess all over the power armour to the model. There are an awful lot of recesses and panels to shade in this method, but it really is worth taking the time to pick them all out, as it will add a lot of interest to the finished model. And if you work through area by area, making sure you just sink a little bit of this into all of the recesses on each area, you will catch them all over that power armour. Don't forget to shade the helmet to the Space Marine as well, as this will be a focal point. So it's worth making sure you pick out all of those recesses, really add some interest and definition to that helmet. And then with some pure Abaddon Black, I'm going to thin this down with a lot of water to make another shade paint. Now, if you're not just using 5 colours, you could use known oil for this step, but as I don't have any known oil, I'm going to thin down Abaddon Black to make my own black shade. So keep adding water so it becomes really thin, flows really smoothly off of a brush, and has the consistency of a shade paint. So you can see you really want to thin this down so it's not too stark and runs really smoothly. And then I'm going to apply this all over the metallic areas that we painted. Obviously it doesn't matter if you get this over any of the black, but try and avoid getting it over any of the white armour. So shade all of the Leadbelcher, let it sink and flow into all the recesses and add some definition to these areas. And with a fine brush, I'm also going to apply it all over the Aquila on his chest. Make sure it sinks between all of those feathers, and we'll add some definition to that Aquila. I'm also going to do a thin pin shade on this shoulder pad, just to add some interest to that recess. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And with those shades dried, you can see it's really added some definition to the model. That recess shade has really picked out all of those recesses all over that power armour and added some interest. So now with some white scar, I'm going to start highlighting the power armour. So for this, on every edge of every panel, I'm going to apply a thin edge highlight of pure white scar. So once again, much like the recess shade, this step will take a while, but it's worth really taking your time, picking out every single edge with a thin line of white scar to add interest and pick out all of the details. So for these flat areas here, use the tip of your brush to ensure you just get a nice, neat, thin line around all of the edges. On some of these sharper areas, like these ones here on the legs, you can use the side of the brush to get a nice smooth line on the edge of all those panels. So just make sure you take your time, work your way around the model, and pick out every edge to every panel of the power armour with a thin edge highlight of pure white scar. This edge highlight step is why I use Celestra Grey for the base coat, because that way I can highlight it with the white. Once the whole model has been finished and highlighted, that power armour will read as white to the eye, but also have all the interest of the edge highlights to add the details and definition. If at any point you come in with a line that's too thick on any of these edge highlights, you can come back in with a little bit of Celestra Grey and thin that line back down again. So just take your time, work your way around the model, pick out every edge of every panel with a thin edge highlight of white scar. Try and keep the pressure on the tip of your brush the same as you work your way around the panels. This will give you an even thickness to the line, but just take your time, work your way around and pick out all of these edges with an edge highlight. Once again, make sure you really focus on the helmet to the Space Marine as the main focal point to the model. We really want to make sure this is looking as good as we can make it. By having your paint nice and thin, it will flow smoothly off of your brush, helping to give even lines all the way across the model. And with that edge highlight applied, you can see it's really picked out all of those panels, added some interest to the model, and made that Celestra Grey read a lot more like white. So now with some white scar and Abaddon Black, in about a 70-30 mix, I'm going to mix the two colours together to create a dark grey. We want this to be about the colour of a Mechanica standard grey. I'm going to thin it down with a little bit of water. For this, I'm going to edge highlight all of the black. So I'm going to start off with the casing on the gun, working my way around, picking out all the edges to all the panels and sharp lines on the gun casing. I'm also going to do the same to the chainsword. Put a thin line all the way around the edge of that blade. For this top part here, I can use the side of my brush. And don't forget to pick out the cross guard and the handle with a thin edge highlight of this grey as well. Using this colour, I'm also going to edge highlight all of the pouches and the belt to the model. Luckily these parts here are quite sharp, so you can use the side of your brush to make this nice quick and easy. I'm also going to highlight the strapping on his back as well with some thin lines of this mix. And then finally, all of the ridges to the undersuit, I'm going to pick those out with just a thin line of this grey mix, just to make them stand out. So take your time, be nice and neat at this stage, as we pick out all of these ridges to the undersuit with a little bit of our grey mix. And with all that black highlighted, the model's really starting to come together now. So next up, with some Mephiston Red and Celestra Grey, I'm going to make a mix to highlight the red. First of all, I put in just a little bit of Celestra Grey. Realise it's not quite light enough, so I grab a little bit more Celestra Grey. So it ends up being about a 60-40 mix between the two colours. I've got this nice light red colour. So I'm going to thin it down with just a little bit of water and apply an edge highlight on all the raised parts of the Aquila. So highlight the top parts of the skull and all of the feathers. I'm just putting a little line of this mix on the top of each of the feathers to give them a highlight. I'm also going to edge highlight the shoulder pads as well. For these, you can use the side of the brush in most places, but be nice and careful to make sure you don't get this over any of the white. And finally, I'm going to sink a thin line into the bottom of each of the eye lenses on the model. And with that red highlighted, there's only a couple of steps left to apply to the model. So now with some white scar again, I'm going to apply a spot highlight in the back corner of each of the eye lenses. It will look like a reflection point. Keep these nice and small, just in the back corner, a little spot of white scar. And now there's just one final step to apply to the model, and that is with some Abaddon Black. I'm going to tidy up the base. So cover all of the base and the rim with a couple of coats of Abaddon Black, but be really careful when you're around the feet. We don't want to get this over any of the Celestra Grey that we've already painted and highlighted, but just apply a couple of coats of Abaddon Black all over the base just to tidy it up. And with the base tidied up, that is how to paint a White Scar Space Marine using just 5 paints. Please let me know in the comments down below what other chapters of Space Marine would you like to see me paint, or are there any other factions from Warhammer 40,000 you would like to see me paint using just 5 paints. So thank you very much for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!